I'm Libby Casey with The Washington Post, and my guest is Chris Ullman. He's political director for ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. Chris, thanks so much for joining us today. We want to talk to you because a video that you did, a commentary about President Donald Trump, has gone viral. We're going to play an excerpt from it so people know what we're talking about.
We learned that Donald Trump has pressed fast forward on the decline of the United States as a global leader. He managed to isolate his nation, to confuse and alienate his allies, and to diminish America. He will cede that power to China and Russia, two authoritarian states that will forge a very different set of rules for the 21st century.
So, Chris, you say that President Trump is hitting fast forward on the decline of the U.S. as a global leader. Why did you use such strong language?
Because it seemed apparent to me while we were at Hamburg that was what was happening. The United States, let's not forget, forged the rules in the second half of the 20th century, and they are rules that helped the world prosper. It's been a force, I believe, on the whole, for good in the world. But we are seeing a shift of power from west to east with the rise of China. Now, that's inevitable, and at some stage the United States has to come to terms with the fact that it's going to have to share power more than it has in the past. That alone will be a difficult thing, and leadership will be tricky. But what we saw at the G20 was an American president who seemed either unwilling or unable to lead. It didn't surprise anyone that there was going to be some dispute when it came to global warming and the US's now position on climate change and the fact that it wanted to pull out of the Paris Accords. So the president should have been prepared for that. He was going to be isolated on one thing. You would have imagined that he'd look for something else where he could galvanise the leaders of the world to be seen to be behind him. He could have done that on North Korea. A whole number of the delegations were expecting that the United States would lead on that, and yet it never came. The United States didn't even apparently appear willing to try it.
I mean, you do talk about how this was a missed opportunity because there was so much concern. There is so much global concern about North Korea, and it was coming right at the moment of the G20 summit. Why do you see that missed opportunity? What is your interpretation of why President Trump didn't take that leadership moment?
Well, I don't know, and I guess the only way that we could find that out is to ask him. I do know, however, that the other delegations were expecting it, and yesterday, and I'm still on tour with our Prime Minister's been through the G20, he's been now to Paris and he's in London, and yesterday there was a press conference with himself and the British Prime Minister, Theresa May, and both of them said that they were very concerned about what was happening on the Korean Peninsula. Our Prime Minister has also said he was surprised that there wasn't some sort of statement coming out of the G20. And one of the things that it would have done as well is that it was fascinating to watch what Xi Jinping did on the way through to the G20. He went through Russia. When he was in Russia, of course, he met with Vladimir Putin. The two of them then put out a joint declaration. That declaration said that there are essentially two problems on the North Korean peninsula. One was North Korea and its missile tests, but the other thing was the United States and its arrangement with South Korea. And it called on both parties, or the Russia and China called on both parties to back off, making them equally culpable in what was going on the Korean Peninsula. Now, that's a very clever political play against the United States. You would have thought that the US president might have had something up his sleeve when he got to the G20 to try and show that it was Russia and China who were the outriders, not the United States.
What's the role of a political editor at the Australian Broadcasting Corporation? How much opining do you get to do?
I'm charged with doing analysis, and I guess that there will be now, as there always is when this happens, a big argument over what falls into the realm of analysis and what falls into the realm of opinion. I would argue that what I said was based on the facts that were before us, and the facts that were before us was the sign of a president of the United States. And we have it in his own words. He said he doesn't want to be president of the world. No one expects Donald Trump to be president of the world. What we expect of the United States is to use its global clout for some kind of leadership. That leadership was absent, and if the United States decides that it does not want to lead, that doesn't mean that there won't be anyone leading, it just won't be you. And then the rules of the world will be established by someone else. And I suggest that will be China and Russia, and the world will be a very different place when the rules are made by those two authoritarian countries.
We're talking with Chris Ullman. He's a politics editor at the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. I want to play a little bit more of your video. It's only 2 minutes and 19 seconds long, but it's been an incredibly impactful 2 minutes. Let's hear another few seconds of it.
He was an uneasy, lonely, awkward figure at this gathering, and you got the strong sense that some of the leaders are trying to find the best way to work around him.
Okay, Chris, so calling the President of the United States uneasy, lonely, and awkward. Once again, those are some carefully chosen and really cutting words.
Well, an observation, again, you can go, if you like, to the declaration, the final statement of the G20, and you'll find that actually it's written into the words there, because we find that sitting alone from the G20 is the United States when it comes on the Paris Accords, something your country had signed up to. So that does make you cut a lonely figure in the world, at least on that front. The language on free trade, again, the paragraphs that were inserted by the United States leaves it at odds with the rest of the world. So again, I'd say that this is an observation based on the facts of the conference.
Has it taken you by surprise how viral and popular your video has become? And some people love it, some people are trying to push back against it, but it's getting so much attention.
Oh, yeah, of course, I've been surprised by it. And again, I guess the other thing too is that I see people describe me as a veteran. Well, I'm 57. I guess that just means that I'm old. So as I'm talking to you down a telephone that's taped to the wall here from our London bureau, this is a very different experience for me as well. So I'm not really au fait with the world as it is now when it comes to social media. I was surprised by the sort of storm that blew up. But doesn't it show that it's just actually probably not an original observation? It's something that people find resonance with. It's something that they perhaps feel themselves that's going awry with the United States. And by the way, don't get me wrong, my country is an ally of your country and a very strong one. Our Prime Minister, and he gets very mixed messages at home, has troubles of his own, is trying as best he can to try and work with the US administration. He's trying to help the President of the United States to lead, because we need US leadership. Australia in particular craves it. The Japanese, I know, I've spoken to them, they crave it. Everyone wants the United States to take the role that they believe it's fit for in the world. The question is whether or not your president is fit for purpose, and I guess that's an open one.
Chris, I read that you're right-leaning in your political commentary. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, see, that's an assessment made by people because they believe that the ABC as a whole, as a public broadcaster like the BBC in London where I am now, it leans to the left, that I belong to a left-wing liberal elite. And sometimes I've said things on the ABC which people think don't fit into that particular worldview. I mean, these are labels that people can apply. All I'd ever have tried to do is to make an assessment of what's going on before me. And the essence, I think, of what we should do as journalists is to try and cut through all of the noise that surrounds something and all of the process that surrounds something like the G20 and say, what was the moment that mattered in this? And this is a moment that really matters. I don't think I can make this point strongly enough about what the absence of US leadership would mean to the rest of the world. In our particular part of the world at the moment, the one power that rivals the United States and which is on the move is China. One of the things it's doing at the moment is corralling the South China Sea, militarising islands there. The only power that has the clout to challenge that with its naval power, and you can project power in a way that no other nation can, particularly through your aircraft carrier strike groups. The only power that can challenge that is the United States. Now, I'm not saying that China's about to shut passageway through the South China Sea, but if push came to shove, 70% of my nation's trade comes through those trade routes. A lot of the trade that goes to the United States comes through those trade routes. At the moment, your nation helps keep them open. You need to think about leadership on this front because it's in your interests to do it, and it also, as a consequence, benefits others.
Do you get the sense, Chris, that at the G20, the general feeling was that Donald Trump truly speaks for America? There, of course, is a lot of pushback in the United States in terms of protests and resistance movements, resistance groups. Democrats in Congress would certainly like the international community to see that there are other voices. But ultimately, is the President of the United States the figurehead and the leader that matters?
He is a figurehead and he is a leader that matters, but one of the things that people know about the United States is that it has a free and very powerful press, and it's one that we greatly admire. And one of the things I find extraordinary about this, and again, it's interesting to see how the narrative's being formed. If you see Xi Jinping being put up as a promoter and, in fact, one of the leaders on free trade, something's fundamentally wrong, because try and invest in elements of the Chinese economy and you'll find you're completely locked out. In fact, the United States is and always will be a much freer economy than China's. But there's no criticism of Xi Jinping coming out of China. Why? Because the media is at the service of the state. That is not the case in the United States. You have the loudest and most vibrant media in the world, and that is vitally important. The entire world knows that there is a very big debate going on at the moment in the US about the leadership of its president. But he's democratically elected. I celebrate that. I came across to your elections. I went down to Logan. I went in West Virginia. I saw the coal mining areas and the depression that is there. I understand what's driving that, and that is the unequal distribution of wealth in your country. We have similar problems. The way that globalisation has affected some countries and some parts of some countries more than others. They're things that do need to be addressed. The problem that I see with the way that the President is going about it at the moment is he's identified what is a really serious problem. What it needs are really serious solutions, but he doesn't offer any really serious solutions. He is wasting his days as President fighting battles with people he doesn't need to fight with. He should pick his ground, make his stand, and do something for those people that he cares about in those regions that I saw, which are so depressed, by leading them.
Chris, as you travel around following the Australian Prime Minister on his post-G20 visits, do you get the sense that the Australian populace is more invested, more curious about what happens on the world stage than perhaps the American public is?
Oh, probably so, because the American public can always look inward to a vast economy, and being as everyone who's alive in America today has only known one world, and that's the world in which America is a leader. You need to start conceiving of a world where that's not the case. Now, that was going to happen anyway. When I said the President pressed fast forward, that's because the movement is afoot. China challenges you as a world leader, and once its economy reaches, and it's not far behind, it depends on what measures you use, but it's you and China really that are now in a tussle for the leadership of the world. And what we saw after the end of the Second World War was the United States set up a series of systems that wrote the rule book for the world. The World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, all of these sorts of forums now, and G20 is another one of these multilateral ones. What they did was set a set of rules for the world that guided it, and in fact created great prosperity. No country on earth actually benefited more from that from China, but Australia's also benefited from that. The question you have to ask yourself is, if you don't intend to lead in the 21st century, somebody else will write the road rules. Does America want another nation to write the road rules for it? Is it prepared to cede that space? Because there are other contesters for it.
Where does this all go from here? What will you be watching in the coming months?
What you should watch is the way that allies respond over time. So Australia will always try and be as close as it can be with the United States. We get told by our defence institutions and our foreign affairs institutions that Australia will survive a Trump presidency, that the relationship with the United States is so strong that it can't be broken by a set of 4 years or even 8 years by a single president. But one of the things that happens in a democracy is that you have to have the goodwill of the people. There is tremendous goodwill in Australia towards the people of the United States and more than that, the idea of the United States. Again, you don't see the world in the way that we do because we sit in very different parts of it. But your nation came to our aid in the Second World War, and that treaty with the United States is something that the people of Australia actually do treasure, and they want the United States to succeed as a leader of the world. And our governments, no matter what stripe they are, will attempt to help an American president do that. But if people start getting concerned, as Japan is concerned now, as Australia is concerned now, you'll look to them, start to make regional alliances to try and fill the hole that will be left by the void that they see coming with the United States. So watch for that. Watch what's happening in the South China Sea. There are a whole host of nations there that are concerned, and look for the breakaways. The Philippines has already done it. So we've seen Duterte go to Russia, speak to Putin, say that China, Russia and the Philippines should stand against the Western world. Pay a little bit more attention to what's happening in that part of the neighbourhood where things are going to get very willing over time if China continues to militarise those islands and if nations continue to be as concerned as they are about its future behaviour.
Let's leave you now with Chris's entire commentary, only about 2 minutes long, but it's gone viral online. Thanks again, Chris.
What we already knew, Barry, that the President of the United States has a particular skill set, that he's identified an illness in Western democracies, but he has no cure for it and seems intent on exploiting it. And we've also learned that he has no desire and no capacity to lead the world. The G20 became the G19 as it ended. On the Paris Climate Accords, the US was left isolated and friendless. But given that that was always going to happen, a deft president would have found an issue around which he could rally most of the leaders. And he had the perfect one, North Korea's missile tests. So where was the G20 statement condemning North Korea, which would have put pressure on China and Russia? Other leaders expected it. They were prepared to back it, but it never came. There's a tendency among some hopeful souls to confuse the speeches written for Trump with the thoughts of the man himself. He did make some interesting scripted observations in Poland about defending the values of the West, and he's in a unique position. He's the one man who has the power to do something about it. But it's the unscripted Trump that's real, a man who barks out bile in 140 characters, who wastes his precious days as president at war with the West's institutions like the judiciary, independent government agencies and the free press. He was an uneasy, lonely, awkward figure at this gathering, and you got the strong sense that some of the leaders are trying to find the best way to work around him. Donald Trump's a man who craves power because it burnishes his celebrity. To be constantly talking and talked about is all that really matters, and there is no value placed on the meaning of words, so what's said one day can be discarded the next. So what did we learn? We learned that Donald Trump has pressed fast forward on the decline of the United States as a global leader. He managed to isolate his nation, to confuse and alienate his allies, and to diminish America. He will cede that power to China and Russia, two authoritarian states that will forge a very different set of rules for the 21st century. Some will cheer the decline of America, but I think we'll miss it when it's gone. And that's the biggest threat to the values of the West, which he claims to hold so dear.